a quiet town, a gunshot, a secret too dangerous to stay buried. Welcome to Trial Tales, where hidden truths claw their way to the surface. This isn't just a crime story. It's about a black boy searching for the father he never knew, a discovery that shatters everything, and a courtroom bombshell no one saw coming. It all starts with an old shoebox and faded photo of a man in uniform. That single moment unravels a web of lies, corruption, a staged suicide, and a justice system stacked against him. But this boy, he didn't stop digging. And when the gavel fell, the truth didn't whisper, it roared. Think you've heard it all? Think again. This case will leave you speechless. So stay with me till the end, and if you love stories where the underdog fights back, hit subscribe. This is just the beginning. Let's dive in. Picture a small town nestled in the sticky heat of Georgia, where the air hums with cicadas and secrets linger like shadows on cracked sidewalks. That's Jackson Hollow, a place where everybody knows your name, but nobody talks about the things that matter. And in the middle of it all is Jamal Carter, a 16-year-old black boy with a fire in his chest that won't let him sit still. Jamal's life isn't fancy, just him and his mom, LaToya Carter, in a weathered little house on the edge of town. She's a single mother, a nurse who pulls night shifts at the local clinic, always coming home with tired eyes and tight lips. Growing up, Jamal got used to the quiet, his mom cooking dinner, the TV flickering in the background, the way she'd hum old gospel tunes to fill the space. But there was one question that kept gnawing at him, a question that hung heavy in that silence. Who's my dad? He'd ask it over the years, sometimes soft, sometimes loud, but LaToya's answer never changed. He left a long time ago, she'd say, her voice flat, her gaze sliding away, like she was hiding something behind those words. Jamal wasn't dumb. He could feel the weight of what she wasn't saying. The way her hands would tense when he pushed, the way her jaw locked like she was biting back a story she didn't want him to hear. He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering about the man who'd walked out before he even had a chance to know him. Was he tall? Did he laugh loud? Did he ever think about the son he left behind? That question became an itch he couldn't scratch, an obsession that grew with every passing year, every dodged answer, every time his mom shut him down. Then one humid afternoon, everything changed. Jamal was home alone, restless, poking around in his mom's room while she was at work, something he knew he shouldn't do but couldn't resist. He slid open her closet, the door creaking loud enough to make him flinch, and there it was, a dusty old shoebox shoved behind a stack of faded scrubs, like it had been waiting for him all along. His heart thumped as he pulled out, the cardboard soft and worn under his fingers. He lifted the lid, and time seemed to slow. Inside was a photograph, yellowed at the edges, of a black man in a crisp police uniform, staring straight into the camera with eyes that felt eerily familiar. Next to it, a folded piece of paper, handwriting shaky and rushed. "I'm sorry, LaToya. I couldn't do it any other way." No name, no date, just those words, dangling like a half-told confession. Jamal sat there on the floor, the photo trembling in his hands, his breath catching in his throat. Who was this man? Why did his mom keep him hidden? And why did that face stir something deep inside him, like a memory he didn't know he had? He flipped the picture over, hoping for a clue, but the back was blank, just a smudge of ink where a name might have been scratched out. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of nothing into something he couldn't ignore. LaToya came home that night, her keys rattling in the lock, and Jamal didn't waste a second. He held up the photo, his voice sharp with a mix of hope and anger. "Who is he, Mom? Is this my dad?" Her face went still, too still, like she'd been caught in a trap she'd spent years avoiding. "Put that back," she snapped, snatching the box from him, her hands shaking more than he'd ever seen. But Jamal wasn't a kid who backed down easy. He'd spent too many nights wondering, too many days filling in the blanks with dreams of a father who might have cared. That photo wasn't just a picture, it was a key, and he was done waiting for someone else to turn it. Jamal Carter wasn't the type to let this go. He decided right then and there to hunt for the truth himself, no matter what it cost him. And that choice, That's where this whole messy, wild story kicks off. He didn't know it yet, but that shoebox was about to blow open a past his mom had fought to bury, a past that wasn't just personal, but tied to something darker, something that had been rotting in Jackson Hollow for years. This black boy was stepping into a mystery bigger than he could have imagined, a journey to find his real dad that had taken places he never expected, straight into a storm he couldn't outrun. Jamal Carter wasn't about to let that photo gather dust in the back of his mind. Not after the way his mom snatched it away, not after the questions it lit up inside him like a wildfire. He needed answers, real ones, and he wasn't going to get them sitting around in Jackson Hollow waiting for LaToya to crack. So he did what any 16-year-old with a mission would do. He turned to the internet, scrolling through late-night searches on his cracked phone screen. That's when he stumbled across it. An old, grainy ad buried on some sketchy local forum. Ray Simmons, private investigator. Discreet. Experienced. Call if you're desperate. The number was still active, and Jamal's gut told him this was his shot. A couple of days later, he found himself standing outside a rundown office on the edge of town, the paint peeling off the door like it hadn't been touched in decades. The air smelled of stale coffee and gasoline, and the sign above creaked in the wind. Inside, Ray Simmons sat behind a cluttered desk, 6 feet of wiry muscle, a graying beard framing a face that had seen too much, and eyes that cut right through you. A black man who'd spent years chasing shadows, now retired but restless, like the job never really let him go. Jamal slid the photo across the desk, the edges curling from how tight he'd been gripping it. "I need to know who this is," he said, his voice steady but laced with something raw, something hungry. Ray leaned back in his chair, the leather squeaking under his weight, and studied the picture with a slow, deliberate squint. He didn't say anything at first, just flipped it over, ran a thumb along the smudged ink, then looked up at Jamal with a stare that felt like a warning. "Don't blame me if you don't like what we dig up, kid," he rasped, his voice low and gravelly, like he'd smoked one too many cigarettes chasing cases just like this. "Truth's a messy thing, cuts deeper than you think." Jamal didn't flinch. He nodded, his jaw tight, because messy or not, he'd spent too long living in the dark. Ray smirked, just a flicker, then grabbed a notepad and got to work, like some old engine sputtering back to life. They started with the photo, that one fragile thread tying Jamal to a past he couldn't touch. Ray's fingers danced over an ancient laptop, pulling up dusty records from the Jackson Hollow Police Department, his brow furrowing deeper with every click. It didn't take long before he froze, his eyes locked on the screen. "Well, damn," he muttered, leaning closer, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "This guy, he looks like Darius Reed." Jamal's heart skipped. Darius Reed, a name that hit him like a punch he didn't see coming. Ray kept talking, his voice picking up speed, filling the room with a tension that made the air feel thick. Reed was a cop here back in the day. Young, sharp, wore that uniform like it meant something. Then 17 years ago, right around when you were born, he up and vanished. No goodbye, no paper trail, just gone. Jamal sat there, his hands clenched into fists, trying to process it. 17 years. The math lined up too perfectly, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like the edge of something sharp. Ray tapped the desk, his voice dropping lower. "Thing is, people don't just disappear like that. Not cops, not here. Something chased him out, or someone made him run. And this photo, it's a hell of a coincidence." Jamal stared at the picture again, that stern face in the uniform staring back, and for the first time, he let himself wonder, really wonder, if this was the man who'd left him behind, the real dad he'd been chasing in his head all these years. The room went quiet, just the hum of a laptop fan and the thud of Jamal's pulse in his ears. Ray leaned forward, his tone shifting darker now, like he was handing over a loaded gun. "You sure you want to pull this thread, kid? 'Cause once we start, there's no going back. And whatever's waiting at the end, it might not be the fairy tale you're hoping for." Jamal swallowed hard, but his eyes didn't waver. He was in too deep now, and that photo wasn't just a clue anymore. It was a map, and he was ready to follow it, no matter where it led. Jamal had no idea what he was stepping into. That name, Darius Reed, wasn't just a lead. It was a key to a door he didn't even know existed. A door that swung open to something dangerous, something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. This black boy was about to stir up a past that Jackson Hollow had buried deep. And the deeper he dug, the closer he got to a truth that could burn everything down. The trail was heating up, and Jamal Carter could feel it, like a buzz under his skin that wouldn't let him rest, pulling him deeper into a mystery he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Ray Simmons had been digging hard, burning through old contacts and dusty files, chasing the ghost of Darius Reed. Late one night, hunched over his desk with a cigarette dangling from his lips, he hit gold, a whisper of a lead that sent a chill down his spine. Darius didn't just vanish, Ray said, his voice rough with exhaustion, eyes glinting with something sharp. He's been hiding, living under a new name, Malcolm Jones, 50 miles from here in a nowhere town called Pine Creek. Jamal's stomach flipped. 50 miles wasn't far, just a stretch of winding back roads and pine trees, but felt like a world away, a place where secrets could fester undisturbed. Ray didn't waste time. The next morning, they piled into his beat-up old pickup, the engine growling like it resented being woken up. Jamal sat shotgun, clutching that faded photo, his knuckles white against the edges as the miles ticked by. Pine Creek was a speck on the map, crumbling houses, a gas station with a flickering sign, and air so thick with silence you could choke on it. Ray parked a block away from a sagging trailer, its paint chipped and windows dark, like it was holding its breath. "That's him," Ray muttered, nodding toward a figure stepping out onto the porch. A tall black man, late 40s, with a limp in his step and a face carved from years of running. Malcolm Jones didn't look like a cop anymore, but those eyes, sharp, guarded, matched the man in Jamal's photo too well to be chance. They watched him for hours, crouched low in the truck, the heat pressing down like a weight. Malcolm moved slow, deliberate, chopping wood, checking the road, like he knew someone could be out there waiting. Jamal couldn't take it anymore. His heart was pounding, a drumbeat of need and fear, and before Ray could stop him, he was out of the truck, boots crunching gravel as he marched straight toward the trailer. Malcolm froze when he saw him, axe still in hand, his posture stiffening like a cornered animal. Up close, Jamal could see the lines etched deep in his face, the gray streaking his hair, the way his shoulders hunched under an invisible burden. "I know who you are," Jamal said, his voice cutting through the quiet, raw and unsteady. He held up the photo, shoving it into Malcolm's line of sight. "You're Darius Reed. Tell me the truth. Are you my father?" The words hung there, heavy and jagged, like they'd torn something open. Malcolm's eyes flicked to the photo, then to Jamal, and for a split second they wavered, widened with something that looked like recognition or maybe guilt. But then his face hardened, shutting down fast. "You got the wrong guy, kid," he snapped, his voice low and clipped, rougher than it needed to be. "I don't know you, and I don't know that name." Jamal stepped closer, heat rising in his chest, his fists trembling at his sides. "Don't lie to me. I've got your picture. My mom kept it all these years." "Why would she do that if you're nobody?" Malcolm's jaw tightened, and for a moment it seemed like he might crack, like the weight of Jamal's words was prying something loose. But then he turned, sharp and sudden, tossing the axe aside with a clang that echoed through the trees. "Get off my property," he growled, his back to Jamal, already retreating toward the trailer. "You're chasing ghosts. Let it go." Jamal didn't move, his breath ragged, anger and hurt boiling over. "Are you my dad?" he shouted, his voice breaking, loud enough to rattle the stillness. "Just tell me. Are you him?" Malcolm paused at the door, one hand on the frame, but he didn't look back. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before he stepped inside and slammed the door shut, leaving Jamal standing there, alone in the dust. Ray caught up then, grabbing Jamal's arm, pulling him back toward the truck. "Easy, kid," he said, his tone firm but soft, like he knew how close Jamal was to breaking. "We'll figure this out." But Jamal couldn't shake it, the way Malcolm's eyes had flickered, the way his voice had trembled just beneath the denial. It wasn't proof, but it was something, and it lodged in his chest like a splinter he couldn't pull out. He sat in the truck, staring at the trailer as they pulled away, the photo crumpled in his lap. Malcolm might have walked away, but Jamal wasn't done, not even close. He was finding his real dad, and this was just the beginning. That confrontation was short, but it flipped everything upside down. Jamal didn't get the answers he wanted, but he got a taste of the truth, and it was enough to keep him pushing. What he didn't know was that the worst was still lurking out there, waiting to pounce. That fleeting moment with Malcolm Jones wasn't just a dead end, it was a spark, and was about to set off a fire neither of them could control. The dust from Pine Creek was still clinging to Jamal's shoes when everything went sideways, faster and harder than he could have seen coming. A few days after that heated standoff with Malcolm Jones, the news hit Jackson Hollow like a thunderclap. Malcolm was dead, found sprawled on the floor of his trailer, a single bullet hole through his temple, blood pooling on the cracked linoleum. The local cops swarmed in, their lights flashing red and blue against the trees, their voices buzzing with the kind of efficiency that felt too polished, too quick. Self-inflicted, they called it, pointing to the gun clutched in Malcolm's stiff hand, a rusty old revolver that looked like it had been pulled from a junk drawer. They wrapped it up in hours, case closed, no questions asked. The official story was neat, tidy. Malcolm Jones, loner with a fake name, couldn't handle the weight of his own shadows, and decided to check out for good. But Jamal wasn't buying it, not for a second. He'd seen those eyes, felt that flicker of something real when he'd confronted Malcolm. A man running from his past doesn't just give up like that, not after dodging the world for 17 years. Ray got him back to the trailer before the cops could lock it down, slipping past the yellow tape under the cover of dusk. The air inside was stale, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the faint sting of gunpowder. Jamal's stomach churned as he stepped over the chalk outline, his eyes scanning the chaos. Overturned chairs, a shattered coffee mug, a life cut short in a way that didn't add up. Then he saw it, a scrap of paper crumpled near Malcolm's outstretched hand, half soaked in red. He snatched it up, his fingers trembling as he smoothed it out. The handwriting was shaky, scrawled in a rush. "I can't face it anymore." No signature, just those 5 words staring back at him like a confession or a plea. Jamal's chest tightened, a storm of doubt and rage swirling inside him. Was this guilt? Fear? Or something forced out of Malcolm to tie up loose ends? He shoved the note into his pocket, his mind racing. Self-inflicted or not, this wasn't the end of the story. Back at Ray's office, the old detective paced the floor, his face grim, the cigarette in his hand burned down to a stub. "This stinks," he growled, slamming a fist on the desk. Cops don't close a case this fast unless they're hiding something. Jamal sat there, the note burning a hole in his pocket, his voice low but steady. "He knew me, Ray. I saw it in his face. And now he's gone, right after I showed up. That's not a coincidence." Ray stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he lit another smoke, the flame casting shadows across his weathered features. "We need someone who can cut through the bullshit," he said, grabbing his phone. "Someone who doesn't scare easy." That's when Lena Brooks entered the picture, a black woman with a reputation that echoed through Georgia courtrooms, a lawyer who'd built her name tearing apart crooked cases and spitting in the face of anyone who tried to shut her down. She walked into Ray's office the next morning, all sharp edges and sharper eyes, heels clicking on the hardwood, a leather briefcase slung over her shoulder like a weapon. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, just dropped into a chair and fixed Jamal with a look that could peel paint. "Show me what you've got," she said, her voice smooth but commanding, the kind that made you sit up straighter without knowing why. Jamal handed over the photo, the note, his whole shaky theory about Malcolm being Darius Reed and maybe his father. Lena studied the evidence, her fingers tracing the blood-stained words, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't flinch at the mess. She'd seen worse, but something in her posture shifted, like a predator catching a scent. "This isn't suicide," she said finally, her tone cold and certain, cutting through the room like a blade. Someone wanted him quiet, and they didn't care how sloppy it looked as long as it stuck. Jamal's breath caught, a mix of relief and dread washing over him. Relief that he wasn't crazy, Dread because if Lena was right, this was bigger than he'd ever imagined, and he was already in too deep to turn back. Ray nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Told you, kid. Messy truth. Now we've got a fight on our hands. Lena leaned forward, her eyes locking on Jamal's, fierce and unflinching. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures. Whoever silenced Malcolm, they're not done yet. Malcolm's death wasn't the end of this road. It was the spark that lit a fuse, the beginning of a storm that was about to tear through everything Jamal thought he knew. He'd come looking for his real dad, but what he found was a body, a lie, and a fight that was just getting started. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they made was darker than anyone could have guessed. Malcolm Jones was dead, but the questions around him were alive and clawing, refusing to let Jamal or anyone else look away. Lena Brooks didn't waste a second. She tore into the case like a storm, her sharp mind slicing through the flimsy story the Pine Creek cops had stitched together. She dragged Ray back to that grim trailer, combing every inch of the scene with a focus that made the air feel electric. It didn't take long for her to spot the crack in the suicide lie. The gun in Malcolm's hand, a rusty, scratched-up revolver, didn't match the bullet they pulled from his skull. The caliber was off, the forensics a mess, and the more she dug, the uglier it got. Ray stood by the bloodstained floor, arms crossed, his jaw tight, as he watched Lena work. This wasn't his gun, she said, holding up the evidence bag, her voice steady but simmering with anger. Someone put it there, someone who didn't care if we noticed, as long as he was dead. The realization hit Jamal like a brick. He'd been right to doubt, but being right didn't feel good. It felt heavy, dangerous, like he'd kick a hornet's nest, and the buzzing was getting louder. Lena didn't stop there. She hauled the findings to the county courthouse, her heels echoing through the halls as she demanded the case be reopened. The local cops pushed back, red-faced, shouting about jurisdiction, but she had the law on her side, and she wasn't budging. Ray wasn't idle either. He dug into his old contacts, pulling strings from his days on the force, chasing whispers about who might have wanted Malcolm gone. The trail kept circling back to one name, Sheriff Tom Grayson, a hulking white man with a badge and a smirk who'd run Jackson Hollow's police department for 2 decades. Grayson wasn't just some small-town cop. He was a fixture, a king in his own mind, the kind of guy who walked into a room and sucked the air out of it. And 17 years ago, he'd worked side by side with Darius Reed, back when Malcolm still wore that name. The deeper they looked, the dirtier it got. Old case files, buried in dusty archives, started painting a picture that made Jamal's stomach turn. Grayson and Darius hadn't just been partners. They'd been players in a game that crushed lives to pad their records. Reports of drug busts gone wrong, arrests that didn't add up, black men and women hauled in on charges that fell apart under scrutiny. It was a pattern, a machine. Fake evidence, planted stashes, confessions beaten out in back rooms, all to make Grayson look like the hero keeping the streets clean. Jamal sat in Ray's office, flipping through those files, his hands shaking as he read name after name. People who'd lost years, families torn apart, all for a lie. They did this together, he whispered, the photo of Darius trembling in his grip. My dad, he was part of it. Ray leaned against the wall, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling around him like a shroud. Maybe he was, he said, his voice low and grim. But maybe he got out, or tried to. Could be why he ran. Could be why he's dead now. Lena paced the room, her briefcase spilling papers across the desk, her eyes blazing with a fire that could burn through steel. Grayson's the key, she said, slamming a file down. He's got the pull, the motive. Silence Darius before he talks. We tie him to this, we crack it wide open. Jamal's head spun, the weight of it all pressing down. His search for his real dad wasn't just a family secret anymore. It was a thread pulling at a whole rotting network, a web of corruption that had been strangling Jackson Hollow for years. The cops might have thought they'd buried Malcolm's story with a quick report and a locked file cabinet, but they'd underestimated the kid who wouldn't let go, and the team he dragged into this fight. Lena and Ray were relentless, piecing together a case that could topple Grayson's throne. Every shred of evidence, Every mismatched detail was a weapon, and they were loading up fast. This wasn't just about one death anymore. It was about dozens of lives, a system built on quicksand, and a sheriff who'd gotten too comfortable thinking he'd never get caught. Jamal didn't know it yet, but he wasn't just chasing his father's ghost. He was unearthing a monster, one that had been feeding on his town for too long. And that monster wasn't going down without a fight. The air in Jackson Hollow's courthouse was thick, stale with old wood and older lies, as the trial of Sheriff Tom Grayson kicked off, a storm finally breaking after weeks of brewing. The room buzzed with whispers, townsfolk crammed into the pews, their eyes darting between the judge's bench and the man in the defendant's chair, a towering figure in a crisp suit, his badge gone but his arrogance still clinging like a second skin. Lena Brooks strode in like she owned the place, her heels clicking sharp against the floor, a stack of files under her arm that weighed more than paper. They were dynamite, ready to blow this whole rotten mess apart. She didn't flinch as she faced the jury, her voice cutting through the hum of the crowd, steady and fierce. "This isn't just about a murder," she said, holding up photos of Malcolm's bloody trailer. "It's about a system, a machine that chewed up lives for years, and Tom Grayson was the one turning the gears." The evidence rolled out like a tidal wave. Ballistics showing the gun wasn't Malcolm's, records of Grayson's dirty arrests, witnesses who'd been too scared to talk until now, their voices trembling as they recounted fake charges and planted drugs. Jamal sat in the witness box, his hands gripping the edges, his 16 years feeling heavier than they ever had. The room went quiet when he spoke, his voice rough, breaking at the seams. "I just wanted to know who my dad was, Darius Reed, Malcolm Jones, whatever his name was. I found him, and they killed him for it." His words hung there, raw and jagged, slicing through the murmurs. Eyes turned to Grayson, who shifted in his seat, his face a mask of stone, but the cracks were showing, a twitch in his jaw, a bead of sweat rolling down his neck. Lena paced before the jury, laying out the timeline, how Grayson and Darius had run their scheme, how Darius had bolted when it got too hot, how Malcolm's death came right after Jamal showed up asking questions. "This wasn't suicide," she snapped. "This was a cleanup." The crowd stirred, tension coiling tighter, but the Rayol jolt came when the courtroom doors creaked open mid-trial. Heads turned, and there she was, LaToya Carter, Jamal's mother, stepping in with her nurse's scrubs still wrinkled from a long shift, her face pale, but her eyes burning. She didn't wait for permission, just walked straight to the stand, her hands trembling as she gripped the rail. The judge raised a gavel, but her voice cut through before it could fall. "I've been quiet too long," she said, her tone soft but unyielding, like a dam about to burst. "Darius didn't leave me," she went on, her gaze locking on Jamal, tears brimming but not falling. "He knew too much, about Grayson, about the drugs, the lies. They threatened him, forced him out of town. I hid it from Jamal to keep him safe, but I can't hide any more." The room erupted, gasps, shouts, the sound of chairs scraping as people leaned forward, stunned. Jamal stared at his mom, his chest heaving, a flood of hurt and relief crashing through him. She'd lied to protect him, but that lie had kept him in the dark while the truth bled out in a trailer 50 miles away. Grayson's lawyer jumped up, barking objections, but the damage was done. LaToya's words were a match tossed into dry grass, and the fire was spreading fast. The jury's faces shifted, doubt creeping in where certainty had been. Lena seized the moment, her voice rising over the chaos. "You heard her. Darius Reed was a loose end, and Grayson tied it off. This isn't one death. It's a cover-up built on years of ruining lives, black lives, for a badge and a paycheck." Jamal sank back in his seat, his hands covering his face, the weight of his mom's confessions sinking in. He'd come here to find his father, but now he was peeling back layers of a nightmare. His dad wasn't just a runaway. He was a victim, maybe even a casualty of a war he couldn't win. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order, but the room was alive now, electric with the kind of energy that doesn't fade. Grayson glared from his chair, his mask slipping, a snarl tugging at his lips as the walls he'd built started to crumble. This trial was heating up fast, accusations flying, truths spilling out like blood from an open wound. But the biggest shock, the one that'd shake this courthouse to its bones, was still waiting in the wings, ready to drop like a hammer. The Jackson Hollow Courthouse was a powder keg, and the air crackled with every breath as the trial hurtled toward its breaking point. Lena Brooks stood at the center of it all, her presence a force of nature, her files spread across the table like a battle map. She'd fought tooth and nail to get here, and now she was ready to drop the hammer that'd shatter everything Grayson had built. The room had been simmering since LaToya's confession, the jury's eyes darting, the crowd whispering, but nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Lena turned to the judge, her voice calm but cutting, a blade wrapped in velvet. "We got one more piece of evidence, DNA." A murmur rippled through the pews as a clerk wheeled in a sealed envelope, the kind that carried fates inside it. Jamal sat frozen, his hands clenched in his lap, his heart thudding so loud he could barely hear the rustle of paper being torn open. The judge skimmed the results, his brow furrowing, then handed it back with a nod. Lena took the sheet, her eyes scanning it once before she faced the room, her tone rising like a tide. "The DNA from Malcolm Jones, Darius Reed, matches Jamal Carter. He was his father." The courtroom exploded, shouts, gasps, chairs scraping as people shot to their feet, a chaos so loud it drowned out the judge's gavel banging for order. Jamal's head snapped up, his breath catching, tears stinging his eyes as the truth hit him like a freight train. Malcolm wasn't just a lead, he was his dad, flesh and blood, gone before he could even say the word. Across the room, Grayson lurched forward in his chair, his face red, veins bulging in his neck. "I didn't kill him," he roared, slamming a fist on the table, his voice cracking with desperation. "He did it himself. I had nothing to do with it." But the lie didn't hold. Lena was ready, her evidence stacked like a fortress. She held up the ballistics report, her words sharp and unrelenting. The gun in Malcolm's hand didn't fire the shot. The bullet came from a service weapon, a match to Grayson's old issue, one he never turned in. The crowd gasped again, a wave of shock rolling through, and Grayson's snarl faltered, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. Lena didn't stop. She pulled out audio logs, grainy recordings from a hidden wire Malcolm had worn years ago, his voice trembling as he named Grayson in the drug scheme. "He wanted out," Lena said, pointing at Grayson, her voice booming now, filling every corner of the room. "Darius Reed tried to run, to disappear, but when Jamal showed up, you panicked. You tracked him down and put a bullet in his head to keep your secrets buried." Grayson's lawyer scrambled, shouting objections, but it was like yelling into a hurricane. The jury was riveted, their faces a mix of horror and fury as the pieces clicked into place. The sheriff's mask was off, and what stared back was a coward clinging to a crumbling throne. Jamal stood up, unsteady, his voice breaking through the noise. "You took him from me," he said, staring straight at Grayson, tears streaming now, raw and unfiltered. "I never even got to know him, and you killed him for what? To save yourself." The room went still, Jamal's pain hanging there, like a wound everyone could feel. LaToya rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder as the weight of years, lost chances, hidden truths, crashed down on them both. Lena turned to the jury, her eyes blazing, her words a final blow. "This isn't just murder, it's a system that's crushed people like us for too long. Grayson didn't just kill Darius Reed, he killed hope, trust, lives, all to prop up his badge. That ends today." The crowd erupted again, some cheering, some cursing, a tidal wave of emotion that shook the old walls. Grayson slumped back, his hands trembling, his empire of lies collapsing under the glare of a dozen accusing eyes. The judge pounded the gavel, his voice hoarse from shouting for quiet, but it barely cut through. The DNA was the spark, and Grayson's guilt was the fuel. The truth wasn't just out, it was a bomb, and it had blown the case wide open. Jamal sank into his seat, clutching his mom's hand, the photo of Darius crumpled against his chest. He'd found his father, but the cost was a scar he'd carry forever, a victory laced with grief, a justice that didn't feel like winning. Grayson's shouts faded into the chaos, drowned by the roar of a room that wouldn't let him hide anymore. The trial wasn't over, but the tide had turned, and there was no escaping the wreckage now. The gavel slammed down in the Jackson Hollow courthouse, a sound that echoed like a gunshot, cutting through the chaos and sealing Tom Grayson's fate. The jury didn't take long, hours, not days, returning with a verdict that hit the room like a thunderbolt, guilty on all counts. Murder, corruption, a laundry list of charges that stretched back years, each one a nail in the coffin of a man who'd ruled this town like a king. Grayson stood there, hands cuffed behind his back, his face drained of color, that smug smirk wiped clean as the judge's voice rang out. Life without parole, the sentence came down, cold and final, a chain wrapping around a legacy built on blood and lies. The crowd erupted, cheers clashing with boos, a storm of voices that spilled out the doors and into the streets. Deputies hauled Grayson away, his head bowed, his footsteps dragging, a fallen giant who'd finally run out of shadows to hide in. Outside, under a sky streaked with the orange of dusk, Jamal stood on the courthouse steps, the air cool against his skin. LaToya pulled him close, her arms trembling as she hugged him tight, her tears soaking into his shirt, tears of relief, of grief, of a battle they'd fought together. "I found him, Mom," Jamal whispered, his voice thick, cracking under the weight of it all. "I found my dad, even if it's just the truth, even if I never got to hold him. I know who he was now." LaToya nodded, her hands cupping his face, her eyes shining with a pride that cut deeper than the pain. "He'd be proud of you," she said, soft but sure, a mother's promise to a son who'd carried her secrets and turned them into something unbreakable. The town felt it too, a ripple that didn't stop at the courtroom. Jackson Hollow's police force was cracked open, exposed, its rot laid bare for all to see. Within days, the mayor called for a full overhaul, new leadership, investigations, a reckoning that promised to uproot every dirty root Grayson had planted. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, headlines screaming about the fall of a sheriff and the kid who'd brought him down. But Jamal didn't care about the spotlight. He slipped away from the chaos, finding quiet in a corner of Ray's office, a notebook in his hands. He started writing. Slow at first, then faster, the words pouring out like they'd been waiting all along. Page after page of his journey, the shoebox, the photo, the trailer, the trial. A story that wasn't just his anymore, but a torch for every life Grayson's machine had crushed. Ray watched from the doorway, a rare smile tugging at his lips, the cigarette in his hand unlit for once. "You're going to make some noise with that," he said, nodding at the notebook, his voice gruff but warm. Lena stopped by too, her briefcase lighter now, her eyes still sharp but softened by something like victory. "This isn't the end," she warned, leaning against the desk. "There's more out there, more Graysons, more fights." "But you started something big, Jamal." The streets of Jackson Hollow buzzed with a new energy, protests forming, voices rising, people who'd stayed silent too long now shouting for change. The town wasn't clean yet, but it was waking up, shaking off the dust of fear and apathy. Jamal looked out the window, the notebook pressed against his chest, the photo of Darius tucked inside its pages. He'd lost a father he'd never known, but he'd gained something else, a fire, a purpose, a truth that couldn't be buried again. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in hues of gold and red, and for the first time in weeks, Jamal breathed easy. Not because it was over, but because he'd fought, and he'd won something that mattered. Grayson's empire was ash now. His reign ended in a cell he'd never leave. Justice didn't come cheap. It took tears, years, and a kid who wouldn't quit. But this time, it came, and it hit like a freight train no one could stop. The dust settled over Jackson Hollow, but the echoes of Jamal Carter's fight lingered. Etched into the streets, the courthouse steps, the hearts of a town forced to face its own reflection. This wasn't just a story about a boy finding his father. It was a battle cry, a crack in the armor of a system that's crushed too many for too long. Jamal's voice became a beacon for those who'd been silenced, a reminder that even the heaviest chains can break when someone dares to pull hard enough. The truth doesn't always come easy. It claws its way out, bloody and bruised, but it always finds a way to shine through the dark. And in this small Georgia town, it burned brighter than anyone could have imagined, lighting up the shadows where lies had festered for years. Lena Brooks stood outside her office a few days later, the wind tugging at her coat, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "We're not done," she said, her voice steady, a promise wrapped in steel. "There are more fights out there, more people who need us." This was just the first swing. Ray Simmons leaned against his truck nearby, flicking ash from a cigarette, his weathered face softening for a moment. "Plenty of secrets still hiding," he muttered, a glint in his eye like he could already hear them whispering. "This town's got skeletons in every closet. Someone's got to dig 'em up." Jamal wasn't there to hear them. He was home, his notebook open, ink staining his fingers as he poured his soul onto the pages. The photo of Darius sat beside him, creased and worn, a silent witness to a story that had changed him forever. The fight had taken pieces of him, his innocence, his trust, but it had given him something too, a purpose, a legacy, a name he could finally claim as his own. He wasn't just a kid anymore, he was a force, and his words were about to ripple far beyond Jackson Hollow. The town itself was shifting, slowly, painfully, like a beast waking from a long sleep. New faces walked the police station halls, old files were dusted off, and voices that had been quiet for decades started to rise, demanding more than promises this time. This victory wasn't perfect, justice rarely is. It came with scars, with losses that couldn't be undone, but it came, and that alone was enough to spark hope in a place that had forgotten what it felt like. For everyone listening, Jamal's story isn't just a tale to pass the time. It's a mirror, a call, a proof that even when the deck's stacked against you, the truth can still win if you're willing to fight for it. So here's the deal, stick with us. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and don't miss what's coming next. Share this with anyone who needs to hear it, because stories like these don't just end, they spread. Next time, we're diving into something even darker, a black mother accused of killing her own child, locked away while the world turned its back. But the real story? It's uglier, twistier, and more horrifying than anyone's ready for. The fight for justice doesn't stop here. It's just getting started. Thanks for being part of it, for listening, for caring. We'll see you in the next one. Brace yourself, because it's going to hit hard.